Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are 15 minutes before we get started, so you're welcome to fast forward 15 minutes if you're watching this in the replay. If you're watching this live, you're welcome to fast forward 15 minutes as well. That would be remarkable. But I would certainly be willing to see what happens. Maybe you could tell me, here's what's going to happen. Things seem to be in order today. It's been a few weeks since I've done one of these, but everything seems to be working. We have audio, or allegedly I have audio. Haven't actually listened to it yet. That might be something to do. That was the wrong button. Let's watch it on my own page. Then we will be really ready at that point. Let's see how this sounds, shall we? Let's turn this down some. Things seem to be in order today. It's been a few weeks. Okay, well, it sounds just fine. So we'll take it. Hello, chat room. All right, let's check cameras, shall we? We've got, hi, here we are. We've got stuff on my screen. We've got me. We've got a graphic. You've got me with a number. You've got talking head and talking head. All right, well, it's all good. Although it would be better. Let's check camera 3 one more time. Yeah. And 4. That looks much better. Okay. Then we can put this on. All right. Well, that's working. Now we are live. I need to change the website. Let's see. If you were a website, where would you change it? Change it right there. Let's change the bar at the top of my page. Change the content to custom text. And it should say to the /live link. My live security plus study group is right now. Here to join us. Save that. Clear the cache. And we're good. Yes, I am back. I am recovering from a delightful cold. You could probably hear a little bit of it in my voice. So I am well medicated. Trying to make sure I'll make it through at least an hour. I'm sure it'll be fine. Don't forget that Socrative is up and running, so you can go to Socrative.com, pop open a new window in your browser, go to the room Professor Messer, or you can download the app for your mobile device and run it from there. And that will get you in answering questions that I ask to see how well you really do. Sure, you'll do fine. You'll be fine. That's what I get for traveling. Went on a trip and got a cold. Someone on this trip gave me a cold. Someone I don't know, a complete stranger, who's passed along germs. Yeah, I think everybody who joins the study group should be well medicated. I think that would be a fine idea. Bring your own medication, whatever it may be. Mine happens to be Dayquil. Yours could be bourbon. It's completely up to you. All right. I've got my, where's my spray? Got my throat spray. We've got the vocal zone has already been taken. I had to order more. It's important. What else? I think we're ready. I did not go to Comic-Con. Nope. I did not. That would have been something. I don't know if I could handle the crowds. Although, what am I saying? I went to New York City, so that's where I went. Actually, crowds weren't so horrible. They were only bad in the places where you would expect the crowds to be bad. Most of the time, I was somewhere else. To make sure I know where that mute button is. Yeah, I got it. Where the mute button is now. Okay. That was me pressing the mute button. It's not really not working. It's me talking while I'm muting myself. Okay. This just seems like at Comic-Con, you've got to stand in line for everything. I'm not a stand in line kind of person. I don't have that level of patience. I used to. I remember the days when I could stand in line. I no longer am able to do that. Okay. This is a doable setup. This setup is never finished, though. In the corner, you can't see it because it's behind the desk. It's over there. Is another computer that I'm hoping to load up to down here. In fact, I should go ahead and start my recordings while I'm thinking about it. It's going to go into my rack that's down here. Record. And it will hopefully be a streaming device for 1080p streaming. Because right now on the live stream, you'll notice you get 720p. But I want to provide 1080p. So I'm hoping to do that. Hopefully it'll handle it. I think it will. I think it's got the chops. Can't just put anything in there and hope for it to stream 1080p. So, study group will be recorded. Everything is always recorded. The replay's immediately available once we're finished. So people can do that and see it and play it back as many times as their heart desires for whatever reason. But I highly recommend doing that. And of course, there's an entire category on my website with all of the archives of all of my study groups, so you can go back and enjoy them. All right. What else are we needing to do? Nothing really. I think I've got the automatic email / Twitter / Facebook thing / Google Plus all going out in 1 minute and 15 seconds. And it's really just up to us at this point. I have a checklist. I could reference the checklist. I had my Evernote up. There we go. Stick the Evernote. And let's see for study group checklist. There it is. Just before event, update the TriCaster with the stream information. Well, I did that or else you would not be seeing this. Update the website banner with live information. We did that while you were watching. So we're in good shape. All right. Should be a good list of things to go through today. I put together a number of different questions. These came really easily this month for some reason. These came out pretty nice. Some are easy, some are not really that easy. So there's the tweeter bot. the buffer tweeter bot. How quickly do people already have the cert, need to email you the secret word in order to get the point or whatever? You know, you don't have to do it, and you can do it at any time. You can watch any study group at any time on the replay, live, whatever. And if I'm doing very well, I will send those out. Usually I take a day a week and I send them all out. And if I usually go through my emails and I'm searching for them, and I'm trying to do a very good job at making sure everyone gets their continuing education unit credit. But if I miss one, you're welcome to email it again. What if you just skip around the replay until you say it and get the word like that? Well, that would not be very fair, would it? What? You're only cheating yourself. I'm going to tunnel your mother now. You're only cheating yourself. You're not really gaining anything by that. And it's really just cheating the people around you. That's all the guilt I got. That's all I can really provide you. I'm assuming you would like to be able to take care of your family, and you can't do it if you cheat yourself. I'm very disappointed in you. See, that's just awful. That's the worst thing that mother or father can say. Very disappointed in you. So there, now you have to watch it. Plus, who doesn't want to watch this? It's remarkably entertaining. It's incredibly entertaining. Why would you not want to do that? What do you mean Netflix is better? How dare you? Okay, we've got 3 minutes. 3 minutes, Mr. Sinatra. 3 minutes to post. Are we charging? We are charging. It's important. How's the weather? Let's have a look. We got quite the rain yesterday. Now, this is what this has come to. I just said this is incredibly entertaining. Now I'm giving you the weather to an area that you don't even live in. What could be better than that? I think I've got everything ready to go. It's just a matter of, do we have this? Yes, we do. I feel like I'm low. I think I'm low in the picture. We're going to have to adjust this or something. Is my chair low? Am I sitting low? That's better. Why don't I sit up properly? That might be an idea. We've got this, got that, got the other thing. Okay, we can do this. Hey, congrats on passing your Network Plus with an 859. Great score. And thank you. I love those study guides. Love those course notes. Those course notes keep this whole party going. Could not do it without you guys. It's a content creation weekend. I got plenty of things to do. I've got my schedule very well set aside so I can concentrate on creating content. You have to get into just a big wall around you. Don't let anybody in. Turn the phone off. You have to get in the zone. See, already my voice is going. This is going to be great. It's going to be fantastic. We're going to love this. All right. What else can I mess up on my screen before we get started? I think that's a pretty good start. All right, everyone. Let's cut to black or cut to title and do this. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the July 2015 Professor Messer Security Plus Study Group. This is our monthly study group where I will ask you questions, you will give me some answers, and we'll see how we do with all of that. And later on, hopefully, my voice will hang on long enough that I can take some phone calls at the end as well. And I'll put up the phone number later in the program. If you are watching this on YouTube and not on the Professor Messer website, you'll notice there's no chat there. Well, there's plenty of chat in the chat room on the Professor Messer website. Go to any page, or if you'd like to watch this and chat at the same time, you can go to professormesser.com/live. There's also a lot of other things going on here at Messer Studios at the world headquarters here in Tallahassee, Florida. We've got so much happening on the Security Plus side. Security Plus is available on my website. If you want to watch all of my videos for free, you certainly can. But I, of course, make the videos available for you as well offline. You can purchase those for offline use at professormesser.com/GetSecPlus. There's also things happening on Twitter, on YouTube, and I'm trying to find out. There's a lot of people joining me on Instagram, even though I've never told anybody about my Instagram, although I think my Instagram name is probably Professor Messer, so it's not very difficult to figure out. There's also voucher codes available on my website, thanks to GTS Learning, our support to them. If you go to professormesser.com/vouchers, you will find that 10% off code. Don't pay full price for your voucher. You can get 10% off of that and save some money right there. Why are we here indeed? It's a really good question. Well, we're here to answer questions. There's plenty to talk about. For those of you interested in that offline course, you could see it, more information, as I mentioned, at professormesser.com/GetSecPlus, where I have my Security Plus course is there. If you need MP3 files to listen to in the car to and from work, those are included with this as well. That's something you don't get online for free. And my course notes, which we were just talking about in the chat room before we got things started, are also included when you purchase the offline course. So I just kind of bundle everything together, and you can find out all about that at professormesser.com/GetSecPlus. Well, what we're going to do is right here. You've got all of these questions and answers to go through, and I do this through a service called Securative. This is a really nice service, and it's absolutely free for you to use. It's absolutely free for me to use, which is why I really like it. Securative is one where I put the questions up, and you can either pop open a new browser window or use your mobile device to follow along, and the questions will just pop up on your screen. You don't have to type anything. Once you get into the room, they'll simply be provided to you right there on the screen. There is also apps for not just your mobile devices. I think there's an add-on, an extension onto Google Chrome, even if you're using Google Chrome. There is a lot of questions I put together, and we go through them, and not just go through questions and give you answers. I'd like to tell you why a question and an answer might be right or why it may not be right. So a good example of this is this question: how long have you been studying for your Security Plus certification? And if you go to Securative.com, or you use the Securative student app, you don't want to use the teacher app, that would be the one for me, and go to Professor Messer Room, PROFESSOR MESSER, as you see at the bottom of the screen there, then you will see something like this that asks, how long have you been studying for your Security Plus certification? And you can see I'm already seeing in real time as you are answering. So I've got less than 3 months, 3 to 6 months, 6 to 9 months, 9 months to a year, over a year, or you already have your Security Plus certification. And currently, the folks that have answered, 67%, have said less than 3 months, 17%, 3 to 6. That's really, I think, the sweet spot for most of us, is we're trying to, in the first 6 months, get everything we need to know about Security Plus. The Security Plus exam, very broad exam. There's a lot of things you have to learn. There's a lot of reading. There's a lot of details associated with that. I would not call this as technical an exam as you might with Network Plus or A Plus. It's one that really asks you more about concepts and topics regarding security and how they are applied in the real world. And it's a very good exam. It's very on point. It's very, very direct. As someone who has been in the security industry for many years, This is a very good exam to get your feet wet with the security topics and start to understand the terms that are used in the industry and how they are applied. So for us so far, you can see a nice group, 63, 64%, less than 3 months. Those of you, by the way, over a year, you 3% of you, that would be someone like me. It takes me a long time to take an exam. So that's one of those where I really do have to sit down and understand the exam and read it and read it and read it. The Security Plus exam itself is one that was released in April of 2014. Someone was in the chat room on my website last night, and they were saying, so what's changed since it's been released? Nothing. This is exactly the same exam objectives as it was when it was released in April of 2014. It's a single exam. You don't have to take multiple exams. You take the one exam and you pass it, and you're Security Plus certified. You get 90 minutes. You can get a maximum of 90 questions. You need a passing score of 750 on this odd little scale of between 100 and 900. So of these 800 points, you need to get 650 of those points. That doesn't even make sense, but there it is. There's probably a very good way to do that. I have no reason they do that. I have no idea why they do it that way. It contains not just multiple choice questions, but you may also get performance-based questions. There's an interesting video that CompTIA has that explains more about the performance-based questions. But those could be fill in the blank. They could be matching. They could be putting you at a command prompt and having you type things in. There is a lot that you would be able to do with a performance-based question. They want to try to ask you questions in different ways so that we can see if this might be something that you really understand rather than just memorizing multiple choice questions and answers. Well, now that we have a pretty good idea of the Security Plus exam, and we understand now, a lot of you are in the Socrative and you're trying things out for yourself. Let's try some questions, shall we? Let's start with the very first one that I have here, which deals with certificates. And if you're going to be working with security, you will absolutely be working with certificates. X509 certificates, most specifically, probably the most common type of certificate that you'll end up using in the security realm. So my question is, which of these would you not expect to find in an X509 certificate? This is one of these questions you might get on the exam that's not asking you about what it is, it's asking you about what it is not. So I'm already giving you those hints to look for those key words in the questions to understand what they're really asking of you. And they'll give you a list of different things like in an X509 certificate, is there a serial number? Is there the name of the issuing certificate authority? Is there a public key, a private key, or the algorithm used in the certificate digital signature? One of these is not what you would not expect to find in an X509 certificate. So that's one of those nice ways to do that. This is one where when you're working with certificates, and an X509 certificate, I'll give you a hint, is a good thing that you might use on a web server. That's a good place to have an X509 certificate to use. You might use these on people's workstations to identify them. There's a lot of different ways to take advantage of these digital certificates, and we use them in so many different ways. It's nice to know the things you need to have inside of the certificate to be able to work with it. So I'll let you go through that. Make sure you go out to Socrative.com and go to the Professor Besser room. I've got the listing there. If you find you're going to the room and nothing's happening, make sure you spell that right so that you get in there. In the chat room, some folks are saying this is there a possibility of having future study groups via Hangouts? Google Hangouts is the technology that Google has. In my particular case, doesn't quite fit this particular way that we do this. I'm looking for a very specific kind of functionality for the study groups. Hangouts doesn't quite fit that. So we've done them with Hangouts before. Early on, we tried a lot of different things, and this is the one we ended up with. Let's see how we did with this particular question, though. And which of these would you not expect to find in an X509 certificate? How did we do? Well, we're all over the place. We've got 25% serial number, 13% said the name of the issuing CA. 18% said the algorithm that was used in the certificate digital signature. And the highest percentage, though, was D, private key. So we would not expect to find a private key in an X509 certificate. Is that true? Would that really be the case? Well, let's step through what a digital certificate might be. Here's some common fields that you might find in a digital certificate. So it might be things like the version of this X509 certificate. There are many different types of versions in that, being able to work with it. There's also, when we start working with it, the serial number. So every certificate gets a specific serial number associated with it. You do have the algorithm used for the signature. This is helpful because if there is a digital signature that's being used, you want to understand what was the algorithm used so that we can check the digital signature. If we didn't know what that was, we would not have that there. The name of the certificate authority is in there, the date and the time, the subject, which is usually the name of the certificate holder. It's usually a distinguished name. There's a DN format associated with the certificate, the public key, and the extension. So if we look at all of the different options that we had, the one thing that did not show up on this list are the folks that did answer D, private key, 39%. You usually do not put your private key along with your certificate. Obviously, your private key is, as the name implies, something that should be kept private. And so it is usually always separated from the rest of the X509 certificate. It's not something that you want to have included with that. So this is one where you should be able to understand the differences in a public key and private key encryption mechanism. So if you haven't gotten to that encryption section yet, or you're trying to figure out public and private, make sure you really understand the differences between asymmetric encryption, which is the public-private key pairs, and symmetric encryption, which is a shared passphrase that is used. So make sure that you have those differences together in your mind so that when you're looking at this and somebody says private key, you know immediately in your mind what a private key is, why it's called the private key, and what it's normally used for. And you'll know that's something you don't want to have as part of some other type of X509 certificate. Now, obviously, you do want to have both the public key and the private key pair. Your public key can be seen by anybody. So it's very common to have your public key as part of your certificates. You can share that one with the world. It's the private key that is usually created at the same time as this certificate, but is not included as part of those fields of the certificate. So that's a pretty important one there. So you folks in the chat room, if you're not seeing these questions in Socrative, make sure you've got the right username put in, or you may need to restart the particular room that you're in to be able to see those and be able to work with them. So if you were the folks that answered D, private key, you got that one absolutely correct. This is one of those that can really be helpful when you're working with the Security Plus exam. And for those of you that answered serial number, the name of the CA, public key, or the algorithm, just keep in mind, now you know what all of the different parts are of that particular X509 certificate. I bet the next time you'll be able to get that one absolutely correct. There's a lot of questions I got this month about encryption, and it is probably one of the most difficult parts of the Security Plus exam objectives, I think, for most people. So I've got a number of encryption questions this month, but we won't stick to that. In fact, I've got another question for you that's a little bit different than encryption. This one gets more into pure security play, really. The question is, which of these would be the best way to correct a buffer overflow vulnerability? This is one of those where knowing the vulnerabilities and understanding what they do is going to be really useful. Now, a lot of people will say getting into security that you need to be able to do these exploits to the vulnerability yourself, or you need to be able to write your own code so that you can understand the vulnerability. Now, if you're a developer, that might be useful. But for most people that are working in the network security field, you don't have to know how to create or how to identify the buffer overflow, but you do need to understand what's happening during the buffer overflow so that when you apply the fixes to this, you know what's going to be patched. You also understand what it would take what it would take to be able to be on the network and take advantage of a buffer overflow, since it's so easy to find these in the network traffic that may be going back and forth. In this particular case, I have a number of options for you. To correct a buffer overflow vulnerability, would you update antivirus signatures? Would you create an IPS signature? Would you move servers to a DMZ? Would you correct the bug in the application, or would you use VPNs to connect remote sites? All of these are valid security things that you could do. Certainly, all of these would have an effect on the security of your environment, but only one of these would really be the best way to correct a buffer overflow vulnerability. And really, that's the key on these exams, is they give you those special words like this one that says the best way. Because I can tell you in this particular answer, I could see 1 to at least 3 different options that could potentially stop a buffer overflow. Only one of them is really the best way to get rid of this particular buffer overflow issue. If you want to get rid of the vulnerability, how would you do it? No answering in the chat room, please. Make sure you go through and think about this one. We've got a number of people that have answered already. If you want to answer, go out to Socrative.com. You can answer this question as well and be able to see how you do. We'll see how people do in just a moment. Let me take a sip. See if we can keep this voice going for the entire hour. I may talk very softly. That's just creepy. Let's not do that. So let's see how we did. Let's click a button. Wow. Again, we're sort of all over the place. If we look at the one with the largest number, about just over 50%, said decorrect the bug in the application, but double digits, 13% said update antivirus signatures, 19% said create an IPS signature, 15% said move servers to a DMZ. Very few of us, 4%, said use VPNs to connect remote sites. Well, the key to solving this particular issue is to understand what a buffer overflow is. That's where there's a section in memory where this application has created a holding place. And in that holding place, this buffer, they're keeping some information. And the application perhaps may not be well written, so that if a second application or some other tweak to the existing application was to overwrite that memory area and go beyond the buffer or effectively overflow the buffer, it's now writing into a section of memory that it normally would not write to. And because of that, there may be something in that section of memory that would allow a bad guy to gain access to your computer. That's why they spend a lot of time looking for buffer overflows, but they're not very easy to find. Buffer overflows are relatively unusual. When you find one, though, they work very hard to try to find out how they could exploit that particular vulnerability. Sometimes buffer overflows, you need to try a lot of different trial and error. Sometimes creating a buffer overflow will just crash a computer. Well, the bad guys don't want that. They want to gain access to your computer. So they're going to find out a way to really get in there and work with it and make sure that it's repeatable and something they can do over and over and over again. Because once they get to that point, they've now got something they can use to get into everybody's machine and be able to work with that. This buffer overflow issue can be a significant problem. Here's a good example of what this might look like. In this particular example, I have 2 variables and I've set up some buffer for these 2 variables. I've set up space for A and I've set up space for B in my program. I don't currently have anything assigned to A. I've just created the space as the developer does. They just create this section in memory because they're going to put something into that later. They do have information in this variable called B. They have a number 1979. You can see the hex value of that 07BB. So one of the things that the bad guys will do is they'll fill in A, but they'll extend the buffer into farther than A should be expected to go. They'll extend it all the way to B. And you can see what they did was change the value in B. Now by putting this excessive, they added an E, which is a hex number 65 onto the end of it, which changes the value of B completely. All they did was add A into their program, and yet it changed a variable they weren't expecting because of this overflow. Well, the key, of course, is that if that variable B was able to do some other type of function into our computer, that may open up a door and allow the bad guys into what's going on. That's why whenever you want to fix a buffer overflow, you really want to be able to do something like to fix the problem with the program itself. The program should not be allowing somebody to write so much information into a variable so that it overflows into the memory that's next to it. So the best option here to correct the buffer overflow vulnerability would be to use D, correct the bug in the application. That would really be the key. And that's why whenever we have those Microsoft vulnerability updates, you always get those patches on Patch Tuesday every month. And those patches are sometimes addressing vulnerabilities like buffer overflows, because somebody found a buffer overflow that was able to take advantage of a problem or even crash your computer. And of course, they want to be able to patch that in your operating system. So this correct the bug in the application is absolutely the way to go. Now, as you may be aware, there are antivirus applications and intrusion prevention systems that can look for certain types of buffer overflows as they are going through the network and stop them on the network before they have a chance to get to your computers. Not every buffer overflow can be found that way or identified that way, but there are certainly a large number of them, and you'll find in most IPS and intrusion prevention, intrusion detection, and antivirus devices and software that they have many signatures to stop some well-known buffer overflows. So that is why A would not be the right answer, B would not be the right answer, because we were looking for the best way to correct a buffer overflow, and really the best way is to fix it at the source and correct the bug in the application. So that's one where buffer overflows and other types of vulnerabilities can be a big problem. Fixing the bug is probably your best bet. There are cases where fixing the bug is a little more difficult. This week, of course, we have problems with hackers that have identified vulnerabilities in automobiles, and they were effectively able to take over the functionality of certain automobiles. And so you had car manufacturers scrambling now to perform updates to the software that was inside of the cars. One of the things they did, though, since these cars were communicating over this mobile network owned by Sprint, they simply added a filter, perhaps using an IPS or some other type of similar technology in the Sprint network. So they effectively stopped the vulnerability, the exploit of the vulnerability, as it's coming through the Sprint network before it can ever get to any of the cars. So, of course, the best way to remove that bug is to fix the software in the cars. But in the meantime, a nice mitigation technique was to filter it out of the mobile network so that you were effectively keeping it from hitting that vulnerability in the cars themselves. Yes, it was remarkably scary and just a really sample of things to come. We're not even close to being to the point where we're protecting all of these new devices that are here, and understanding how to solve these vulnerabilities is going to be an important part of that. Let's do another question then, and I'm going to really step into, again, more encryption type questions. I told you there was going to be a few of those here, so let's do one. And this question is, which of these is used to validate a digital signature? This is a pretty important question because we use digital signatures a lot. We use them extensively. We're obviously using them all the time when we are communicating to an encrypted server. We're using them to send information back and forth whenever we're sending documents. We use them on websites to validate and confirm that the information that we are downloading has not been changed somewhere along the way. And I have a number of options for you to choose from. Which of these is used to validate a digital signature? Is it a private key, a salted hash, a symmetric key, a public key, a plain text, or a shared secret key? Wow, there's a lot of options there. I put a lot of options there to make this one a little more difficult to answer. And again, this gets back to that public key, private key, digital signature, asymmetric encryption type question that we were really talking about earlier, and understanding that and the differences between symmetric or shared keys. So when we're talking about digital signatures, where does that fit? Is it asymmetric? Is it symmetric? Is it a shared key? Is it a public key? Is it a private key? Is it a salted hash? Which one of these could it possibly be? So you really do have to go out and understand how digital signatures are used and how you might want to use them. And again, no answering in the chat room. We want to go out to Socrative.com. You can answer there. Put your answer into the room name, Professor Messer. You'll see the name pop up there, and you'll be able to do exactly that piece of it. Yes, now this is one where working with digital signature is going to be increasingly important. You can bet that the update that is being sent to all of the cars that have this particular vulnerability in it will be making sure that they are validating these different codes that they are sending using something like a digital signature. It's a perfect way to make sure that the code that is being installed in the car is exactly the code that was being sent by the manufacturer of the automobile. So this is one where it becomes very important. So let's see how we did. How did we do with this one? Let's see how we've got answers all over the place. If we look at the largest number, 40% said private key. But our second most, 28%, said public key. And we have double digits in our salted hash and our shared secret key. Hardly anybody said it was a symmetric key, and hardly anybody said it was plain text. So it's got to be one of these, doesn't it? Well, let's have a look at digital signatures and how they work. With digital signatures, the person who is creating the content at the very beginning is the one signing it. So just like anything else, I'm going to sign it to say this is something that I have written down, and I want to be assured that nobody else can change anything with this file, with this document, or anything else associated with it. So I'm going to sign it. Well, to be able to do that, I need to sign it with something that's very unique. So obviously, the private key is something nobody else has. So I'm going to grab my private key and I'm going to sign it. If I was signing it with a public key, well, anybody could sign it because my public key is out there in the world. The private key is the only thing that I have that nobody else has. So we want to be sure that we are signing things with our private key. In fact, the message itself, and when we digitally sign something, doesn't even need to be encrypted. It certainly can be encrypted, and we can sign it along with the encryption, but you don't have to. You could have a plain text email message that you're sending, and you can digitally sign it, add a digital signature to the bottom of that plain text message. That way, because it's the private key, nobody else can sign this. Only you can sign this. When the verification of a digitally signed document or a digitally signed file is something you would then verify with the public key. So this is kind of the opposite of when you are encrypting information and sending it to someone. Because when you're encrypting information, you're encrypting with the public key and you're decrypting with the private key. So it's a little bit different in that scenario. So in this particular case with digital signatures, you always need to remember you're signing with the private key. And if we go back and see how we did, we can see that in this particular case, we signed with the private key. And indeed, the 44% of you that said, or validating private key, 44% of you said private key. But the actual correct answer when you're validating the digital signature is you're validating with the public key. You're verifying because public key is the only thing out there that is really matched to what that private information was. Public key, the 28% of you that said D, public key would be absolutely correct for the validation. When you're creating the signature, if the question was, which of these is used to sign and create a digital signature, you would have been correct with A. But in this case, we're asking to validate the digital signature. So in that particular case, we would need the public key. There's a lot to remember on this Security Plus exam. There's so many different aspects of vulnerabilities and devices and processes and procedures and encryption with publics and private keys. Well, one of the things that I've done is take all of this information from every single one of my videos, and I've created a set of course notes for you so that you don't have to go through every single one of those. I've taken all the graphics, all of the charts, all of the tables, and I've taken all of those and put them into a single PDF electronic document. These are my Security Plus course notes. Everything that I've taken is put into this single PDF file. It's 35 pages long. The Security Plus exam, probably the most amount of information that you have to remember when you compare it to an A Plus or Network Plus. This is much larger. in that respect because it includes network design, cloud computing, protocols, encryption, security controls, risk management, so much more information associated with this exam. Here's what it looks like. Here are my course notes. So all of the things about devices. Here is information about VLANs, network address translation. There's the cloud computing section, the IP addressing section, all the ports and protocols you would ever need to know, the OSI model, encryption that's being used on wireless networks, the wireless security, and I'm only down here through page 6. There's so much more on this piece. There's a lot here. There is 35 pages, as I mentioned here. It is a document that once you download, you can put on all of your devices. So wherever you go, you will have this PDF file with you. You can even print it out if you want to and keep it with you. You're purchasing this personal license that you can use for yourself wherever you happen to be. And this is something that also is only $10, and the price of this, the cost of this, goes directly to keeping the website going. So this is an incredibly important part of what we do here. I want to thank you for your support. I prefer that people are able to get something like this product rather than simply sending in things like a donation to the site. I think you should get something for your money. So $10, you can learn more about this at professormesser.com/securitycn, and you would be able to see that. Yes, everyone in the chat room says, can't you scroll a little bit slower through that? There's a lot of detail. I'd be scrolling a long time to get through all of those pieces. There's a lot there. Pardon me. We will make it through this particular study group, I promise. My throat, I don't know if my throat will or not, but we're going to try it anyway. Let's try another question. For instance, in which of these cases would you be most likely to use key escrow? What in the world is key escrow and why would I use it? Well, let's see what our different options might be. Is it to, would I be using this for long-term storage of public data? Would I be using this if a database needs to be archived? Would I use this for instant recovery of encrypted data? Would I use key escrow for a third party that needs access to encrypted information? Or would I use key escrow because information needs to be encrypted in transit? Key escrow has got to be used for one of these, right? We've got to be able to take advantage of those particular pieces. So we know that there's some options here. You can select your option by going to Socrative.com and going to the Professor Messer room. If you're already there, you may notice it just pops up and gives you that different question as you go. You don't even have to click anything. It just goes from one question to the other. Let's see how we do with this one. I need some music that plays. Except if I do that, then you won't be able to watch this video in Germany. So that's why there is no music on these particular pieces. Let's see how we do with these pieces. Let's see how I can tell most of you are really thinking about this one because I can see how many people are answering. Usually the number shoots up when we all know the answer. So stop Googling. You can take a guess. Just try it out and see how that works there in going through these different pieces. So in which of these cases would you be most likely to use key escrow? Wow, we got 65% of you said D. But again, we got some double digits, long-term storage of public data. We've got instant recovery of encrypted data, and information needs to be encrypted in transit. So there's one of these that's got to be the answer we're looking for. Well, first, let's talk about key escrow. For those of you that perhaps own a home, you know there is a certain amount of money that is put into escrow when you purchase your house. It's a holding spot. It's a third party that's keeping your money. That way they have something to do things like pay taxes every year on the property that you own and those particular things. For key escrow, it's the same idea. A third party, a trusted middleman, is going to be holding your encryption keys. Well, that doesn't sound like something you'd normally want to do, is it? Well, it might be. Actually, there might be a very good reason to do this. You may want to have this third party be inside of your own organization so that you have all of these private keys that have been put out and users are using to encrypt information, and they're holding on to those private keys. And then we have one master key that can also be used to decrypt any of the information in our environment. We may want to take that private key and put it into a central safe, maybe have a process in place so that you only access that private key, that master private key, if there is a particular need to do so. Otherwise, everybody's information remains encrypted. This is something that then we can restore some data. Maybe somebody leaves the organization, or maybe somebody loses their private key. Now we have a way we can go to the third party and say we now have a need to decrypt the information that was here originally. In some cases, and this is obviously extremely controversial, is that the government agencies would love to have a copy of these private keys. They would like to be the escrow agent for your private keys, and they'd love nothing better than to do that, because they feel that the best way to be able to look into your data is to decrypt it and then see if you're doing something wrong. There's obviously a number of questions and controversies that can come from that particular kind of thing, but you can imagine that this is something that they would love to be able to do. So sometimes this key encryption is something incredibly important you want to have for your organization. Sometimes it has a little bit more of a security management challenge associated with it. So this is where sometimes you want to have that key escrow, because a third party does need to decrypt your data and be able to do something with that data. So it just depends on the scenario that you have in your environment. If we go back to our question here, in our particular case, as I mentioned, we do have an option here. Option C was instant recovery of encrypted data. Normally, when you're using key escrow, the key is with a third party. There is no instantaneous access to that particular key, so that would not be the correct answer. The best answer really is D. The 63% of you got that one absolutely right. A third party needs access to encrypted information. There's a lot of different ways to do this. In the chat room, they're asking if the recovery agent would use that master key. There's a lot of different ways to do this. With something like asymmetric encryption, where everybody has a private key, you can even take the master key. You can effectively cut that key into pieces digitally. You can have many different pieces of this, and you can even have it set up so that you can only decrypt that information if you have 3 of the 5 pieces of that available. So this is one where you can have multiple people, and you could say everybody has to have their key and turn it at the same time to decrypt, or you can have one single master key, or you can have a certain number of those keys available. There's a lot of different ways to do this. And that goes well beyond the scope of the Security Plus. You don't need to know that level of key management for the Security Plus exam. But this is where you're really working, and for key escrow, you're understanding that a third party, whether it's inside or outside of your organization, is keeping a copy of those keys. So that's where, and the question in the chat room, what in key escrow is it not? What about a fourth party or a fifth party? Well, this is a trusted place that you're handing your keys off to. Your private keys is not something you just give to anybody. So ideally, in the best scenario, the person you are trusting is one that is not going to be providing those keys to anyone else. But that's obviously a significant concern whenever you're doing anything relating to key escrow. So already you're thinking like security people. That's exactly how you should be thinking. Let's do another question. Since we're on a roll here, let's do one that deals with firewalls, a topic close to my heart. Let's talk about firewall rules. And the question is specifically, which of these would not commonly be used as a firewall rule tuple? So we have to know what a firewall rule tuple is, and then we have to know, would it be operating system, time of day, a TCP port number, an IP address, or a UDP port number? It's got to be one of these. One of these would not commonly be used as a firewall rule tuple. This becomes pretty important. Managing firewalls is probably one of the most common things a security professional will be doing. Certainly one of the most important things. It's your first line of defense, both on the inbound to your network and people who are communicating outbound. You want to protect people who are talking out to the internet just as much as you want to protect people on the inside from the people on the internet. And you can do that a lot with today's firewalls. Huge capabilities there. So one of these, when our firewall rule must have a tuple, and this tuple can be a number of different things. If you think you know which one of these would not commonly be used as a firewall rule tuple, you can go to socrative.com and answer the question. And no chatting in the chat room about that one, and no Googling. Stop Googling this. I can hear you typing into the Google machine with that particular piece of it. We've got a number of people that have answered. Let's see how we're doing here so far. Which of these would not commonly be used as a firewall rule tuple? Operating system, time of day, TCP port number, IP address, or UDP port number. And wow, 77% said, oh, it's operating system. 18% said time of day, and then almost nobody said TCP port number, IP address, or UDP port number. So we need to think about firewall rules now. And let's talk about what a firewall rule tuple is. A tuple is this category of information that is used to make a determination on whether traffic is allowed or not allowed through this particular firewall. So normally you would have things like a source IP address, a destination IP address, a port number, a TCP port number, a UDP port number. These are tuples that are used in the firewall rule itself. And very commonly, you can also find things like the time of day or application. A firewall rule tuple for time of day, it may be that you disallow YouTube during the hours of 9 and 5, but after 5 p.m. to 9 in the morning during the nighttime hours, maybe you allow YouTube. So time of day is a very common tuple to have in your firewall rules. There is quite a bit when you start working through this that you can do, especially on the more modern firewalls where you're really working into things like applications. This is probably the newest type of tuple that you might find, is you can specify the exact application as part of the firewall rule. If you are using YouTube, block it. That's a pretty easy rule. There's no TCP port number. There's no UDP port number. You don't have to know anything about it. The firewall recognizes the application and can allow or stop information as it's going. Usually these firewall rules are evaluated from the top to the bottom. So you start at the top, and if it matches the first rule, you're done. But if it doesn't match the first rule, we go to the next rule and evaluate that rule. If it doesn't match that rule, we go to the third. The rules don't combine with each other. Each rule is a standalone evaluation. So it starts at the top and simply steps through until it finds something that matches the particular traffic that's coming through the firewall. Usually this can be obviously very general rules or very specific rules. Usually you put the very specific rules at the top so that you're able to stop those before it goes any further down the line of those particular pieces. Usually at the bottom, the last rule in the firewall, you may go through every single one of those rules and nothing matches. So what do you do when none of your firewall rules match the traffic coming through? On most firewalls, really on all firewalls, you're not going to find one that works any different. There is something called an implicit deny. So if you've not put a rule at the bottom that says if it doesn't match anything else, drop it, the firewall is going to do that anyway. This implicit deny is just a part of any firewall, which makes sense because if you've allowed or disallowed traffic, you've gone through this entire list of things that's important to you, and it doesn't match anything in that list, yeah, let's not even let it into the network. This is not one of those situations where you want to open it up to the world. So that's one of those that becomes very, very useful to work with, and something you do have to keep in mind, because if you do have a firewall rule list like the one here, at the very bottom, there's not a deny all, but there's an implied deny, an implicit deny that is at the bottom. So we want to keep that in mind whenever we're working with firewall rules. This is the same firewall rule set that I have in my firewall video. We step through each one of these rules. So we start at the top. So the first one is rule number 1, from any remote IP address, from any remote port, going to any local port number that is a TCP/22, allow that traffic. And if that matches that, then we've already matched that rule and the traffic is allowed through the firewall. If this does not happen to be anything going to a local port 22, it doesn't match that rule, we go to the next rule. Does this particular rule evaluate? So whenever you start working with very large firewall rule bases, you become very good at trying to match things as it's going through this list. And usually very large firewalls will have a test feature where you can send information in and say, I'm going to test this particular TCP port number, UDP port number, application name. Does it match any of the rules in my firewall currently? And it will tell you which rule it matches. So that gets beyond the scope of the Security Plus, but understanding these particular firewall rules becomes really, really important to be able to do that. And this would be a good example of blocking certain types of traffic in the chat room. The question is, what would be the firewall equivalent for an InMap filtered port? I guess you're assuming or talking about an InMap port scan. Well, there are ways that these firewalls are also looking for port scans. They aren't just going through firewall rules. Being able to do that would also allow that particular piece too. And usually when traffic is dropped from a firewall, it does not send a response back. It doesn't tell you that, hey, I dropped your traffic. The traffic just doesn't get through and you never get a response. And in fact, with InMap, it tells you that the traffic is either filtered or the port is closed. So you're never quite sure because you never get a response in either of those situations. It's either being dropped or it was never available for you to send traffic through to begin with. You may be getting all the way to the end station and the port's not open, you don't get a response. So that often happens as well. So glad we got to do a firewall question. A lot of questions this week about firewalls and getting those to run. So I'm glad we were able to do that. Let's see how we answered then. And in fact, the one firewall rule tuple you would not often see here would be the operating system. 71% of you that said A would be absolutely correct. And that's because the operating system is relatively invisible to the network traffic going over the network. If you're looking for someone who's trying to start a session with port 80 web traffic, you don't know if that's coming from a Windows 10, a Windows 8, a Windows 7, a Mac OS, a Linux device, an iOS, and Android. Having that first TCP packet come through, you have no idea. So that is why operating system generally is not one you would ever see as part of a firewall rule. There are many ways firewalls can identify operating systems, though. That gets into a whole other conversation that goes a little bit outside the scope of Security Plus, but it gets into doing things like checking different devices before you allow them through the firewall. Many firewalls are very complex these days. They can really look for a lot of different things, but the question here really talked about what was common. So very important consideration to put into that list. Let's do another question. Let's keep this party going. We got a few minutes left. Which of these would be the best way to ensure data integrity? And I'm looking for data integrity. I'm looking to for you to pick two different answers here. In fact, the pick two is really on your Socrative side itself. Which of these would be the best way to ensure data integrity? Pick two. Would it be encrypt with a public key? Use symmetric key encryption, publish a hash of the plain text, decrypt with a private key, or provide a digital signature. So two of these would be the best ways to ensure data integrity. So if you think you know the answer, go out to thesocrative.com, go to the Professor Messer room, and you'd be able to answer in that. It's one of those that you need to understand. Two steps here. You need to understand what data integrity is really referring to, and then we need to understand the ways that data integrity is implemented. So you have to pick two of those in that particular list. So if you think you know the answer, see how we're doing. Slow to answer on this one. Now, obviously, we're going to be picking two answers in this particular case, but we need to go through and really try to figure out which two of these it might be. So we're really looking for a 50-50 somewhere. If anybody goes over that particular number, we'll know that we got a few more than we were really expecting with that particular piece. So let's see. We've got 35, 36. Okay, we're answering now. We're giving it a shot. So let's try. Let's see how we did when we're looking at that. Let's, how do we do? Okay. We got a nice even distribution across the entire list. So we've got encrypt with a public key, use symmetric key encryption, publish a hash, decrypt with private key. I guess 35% said provide a digital signature, 23% publish a hash of the plain text. And obviously these aren't going to match exactly because we were choosing two with this, but we can at least see what the larger numbers were. Decrypting with a private key, 14%. Use symmetric key encryption, 14%. Encrypting with a public key, 13%. Relatively low numbers compared to the others. So let's see what this really would be. To understand data integrity, we should probably look at that principle to begin with. One way to describe the way that integrity fits into the big picture is to use something like what they call the AIC triad. This is availability, this is integrity, and this is confidentiality. This is one where availability is obviously one of the biggest things we want to do as security people is keep all of our systems up and running. So having a system go down, even though it may be secure, is not exactly what we're trying to do. Another leg of the AIC triad is the integrity part. That's the question that I was asking, is ways to ensure data integrity. This means that when we are sending information or messages through the network, that they are not able to be modified. And if they are modified, we need to be able to detect that they have been modified. There is also confidentiality. This one probably relatively straightforward. Most people understand the idea of something being confidential, where we want to make sure that private information stays private and that it is not disclosed to people who should not gain access to that data. So we talk specifically about the integrity piece, since the question was asking the best way to ensure data integrity. We want to be able to send that data and make sure that it is stored and transferred exactly as it was originally intended. We want to be able to identify if anybody modifies that. The good way to do this would be to create a hash of what we are sending and send that hash information. On the other side, we perform the same hashing algorithm and compare it to the hashing number we had originally. That's a very good way to test. In fact, if you download certain files from the internet, you'll notice that it will have a file download and it will have something like a SHA-256 hash right next to it. And what it's telling you is that once you download the file, run your own SHA-256 hash algorithm on it and compare your results with what you got when you saw this on my website. So that's one good way to do that particular piece. Digital signature is another great way to ensure integrity, because if you send this information, you digitally sign it. On the other side, you can check the digital signature and it will tell you if this text that you are looking at was changed in any way from when it was originally signed. So that's a very good way to do that. Certificates can do this as well, using that digital signature and having these as set up as individual certificates is a great way to do that. This is something also called non-repudiation, where you not only have proof that the data has maintained its integrity, but you can also be sure that this was the original data that was sent from the very beginning. So the two important ones here, the hashing and the digital signatures, pretty important. So when we look at our list, our two largest numbers here, 37% said provide a digital signature and 24% said publish a hash of the plain text. If you answered C and E, you got this one absolutely correct. There is a lot of different things that you can work with when you're dealing with encryption, when you're dealing with digital signatures, trying to understand how to use these different public and private keys, where these certificates fit into everything, understanding how to use the command line functions that might be available. And of course, CompTIA may be asking you specifically to be able to perform some functions to prove you really know how to make that happen. And one of the ways that you can do that is through something like an online lab. And the folks at GTS Learning have their freestyle labs, which are labs that are specifically created to provide these types of hands-on functionality. So they've already got all of the systems, all of the routers, all of the firewalls, all of the web servers, all of the security pieces you need to be able to make this work. It's all online. You access it through your browser, so there's no additional software that you would need. It's always available. You can access it from anywhere. You don't have to install anything, so you can run this from practically any type of computer, and you don't have to set up a lot of systems yourself to make this happen. They can step you through all of the labs and have them running. This is the labs that I have on my site. I'm running their labs right now. Here is the exercise for configuring NAT. So I'm working with their labs on my screen, and I configure the NAT firewall. It takes you step by step through exactly what you need to do for every part of the lab. In fact, you're doing port forwarding with this particular piece of these. This is one where whenever you're going through the lab, it not only tells you, it shows you exactly what you would need to be able to use that. This is one where I've actually used these myself whenever I've been working with them, because whenever I start working with this, I want to be able to click on a device. Here, the server, for instance, just became available. Let's click on that. Connects to it. There's my remote connection. It's using HTML5 in my browser. So now I'm able to gain access to this and step through all of the different sections for this. I can go to roles, add the role. It's a Windows machine. It's a full-blown Windows machine. I can start working with it. Here's the controls. I can go into the networking piece of it. I can run applications on here. I've got Wireshark already loaded and installed on this particular virtual machine. I can start capturing packets from the network. Let's choose an interface, of course. Let's go through here. Let's choose that one. I don't know if there's anything even running on that one or not. But now you can step through all of those pieces and run through this and be able to work with all of those different capabilities on the virtual machine. Oh, I didn't even set up a filter on that. I've also got a client here. Here's my gateway connection, so a separate machine. Here's the gateway. So another machine that I can use to configure. So as you can see, very fast to flip through all of these because it's a remote access to these. I don't have to build my own systems. I don't have to have separate machines running in my environment or separate pieces there. This is one that really becomes very useful and very handy. And you can not just do, I'm doing network address translation, but you can see on here, there's Trojans and malware protection, establishing host security, protocol analyzers, vulnerability scanning, PKI concepts for those of you trying to figure out that public and private key piece, certificate management, application security, radius, and much more. If you want to find out more about this, you can, of course, go out to professormesser.com/seclabs, SEC Labs, and try them out for yourself. They'll give you an hour for free. You can see if this is really something that you want to try. This may be able to get you over that hump of those performance-based questions that you will get on your Security Plus exam. And I've got a special price on them as well. If you decide this is something you want to do, don't pay the regular price from the GTS Learning site. Use my link, and you can get this for only $99 instead of paying the $159 that it normally would be. So check that out, professormesser.com/seclabs. And we want to thank the folks at GTS Learning for supporting us and for sponsoring what we do with this as well. Well, we've got more questions for you, so let's keep this going. And this question really deals with understanding this functionality or capability on the Security Plus exam. The question is, which of these would be an example of federation? So this is one where you really need to get into understanding more about these terms that are used. What is federation? Well, one of these is going to be federation. What would it be? It would be segmenting the network using VLANs. Would it be encrypting data through a VPN tunnel? Would it be using a trusted CA to encrypt an SSL session? Or would it be authenticating to a non-Google site with your Google credentials? One of these is federation. What could it possibly be? If you think you know, go to the Socrative website at socrative.com. And you can try the room name Professor Messer and see if you happen to know what it is. This is very useful to be able to work on the Security Plus exam because it is full of terms that you have to know, probably more so than the A Plus and the Network Plus combined. I think that's why my course notes are 35 pages long, because there's so many terms and so many bullets associated with understanding what those terms are that you really do have to know it. So try to figure it out yourself. For those of you following along or watching the replay, which of these would be an example of federation? Would it be segmenting the network using VLANs, encrypting data through a VPN tunnel, using trusted CAs to decrypt SSL sessions, or authenticating to a non-Google site with your Google credentials? It's got to be that it is not United Federation of Planets, as they say in the chat room. You'd think that it would be, but no, it's not. It has nothing to do with that. Why is that? I don't know. That's security for you. So let's see how we're doing. This is another one we're slowly answering the question and trying to figure it out and what could it possibly be. For those of you that are waiting to answer this question, if you're watching this for continuing education credit, you can send me an email with the word Federation in it. This is one where you go to the top of the Professor Messer website. There's a Contact Us link. Send me your name. To put in there that this is the July 2015 Security Plus Study Group and that the secret keyword is Federation, and I will reply back to you with a 1-hour CEU, this little digital certificate. It's just an email I send back to you certifying that you must have watched this thing because you know the secret word. Again, you go to the Professor Messer website, Contact Us, which is really contact me, goes to my phone, goes to my email. I see everything. If you want to put something in the note and say hello, I like to read those too. So that's one where, let's see how we did with Federation. How did we do? Click. Well, we're all over the place with this one, although again, one that is very high number, 58%, said authenticating to a non-Google site with your Google credentials. 23% though did say using a trusted CA to decrypt SSL sessions, which happens more often than you might think. And 12% said segmenting the network using VLANs. Only 8% said encrypting data through a VPN tunnel. So what would that be? This Federation. Well, the idea of Federation is where we are providing access through the network to others. It may be partners. It may be more than just the employees. It may be third parties that are coming into your environment, people who need access to these services. But you don't necessarily want to set up a completely separate authentication method. What if there was an authentication method that was known to both of you that you could take advantage of? Well, that's Federation. That's a good federated network. A very good example of this is when you go to a website and they want you to log in with your Facebook credentials or with your Google credentials or with your Twitter credentials. If you're in my chat room on my website, one of your options was to use the credentials for ChatWe, or you can simply log in with your Facebook login and you don't have to do anything else. This is something that is also a secure method of logging in because I can't see your Facebook credentials. This is all an encrypted communication back to Facebook. So you can also be assured that this federated method is one that is also going to maintain the security of your credentials as well. It's just a way to build this trust relationship between all three of the parties, the people who are providing the services, the people logging into the services, and there may be a third party that's also providing the authentication to those services. So it becomes very, very useful to have that functionality. And it allows you a bit of trust as well, and to use an authentication method instead of creating an entirely new login and registering at yet another website. I can do that to be able to make that happen. So if you are the folks Indeed with D that answered authenticating to a non-Google site with your Google credentials, that would be a very good example of federation. The 57% of you would be absolutely correct. Well done with that one. I do want to remind you, for those of you that are planning to take your Security Plus certification, that you should absolutely go out to the CompTIA website. If you've not done this, you should just stop watching this right now and go do this. Go get the exam objectives from CompTIA. The Security Plus exam objectives are extensive. There are tons of objectives there and available to you. Let me pull up my list of Security Plus exam objectives just so you can get an idea of what this might be. I've downloaded these from the CompTIA website. Here's what they are. So here's the ones for the SY0401. Here's the network security. They go into great detail by telling you exactly what you need to know on the exam. So for network security, you've got implement security configuration parameters on network devices and other technologies. I need to do that on firewalls, routers, switches, load balancers, proxies, web security gateways, VPN concentrators, NIDs and NIPs, behavior-based, signature-based, anomaly-based, heuristics, protocol analyzers, spam filters, UTM devices, web application firewalls. What's the difference between that and network firewall? Application-aware devices such as firewalls, IPSs, IDSs, and proxies. And we're finally through section 1.1. That's just the first section of the exam. But look at the detail here. This is going to tell you exactly what you need to know to pass this exam. If you can go through each one of these bullets and put a check mark and say, I do know how to implement security configuration parameters on a firewall, a router, a switch, a load balancer, and etc., then you're ready for the exam. And this is a lot of detail here. If I just keep scrolling through, in fact, some of my notes are in here from when I was creating my videos. So section 2, we're going to keep going. Section 2.4, 2.5, 2.6, and on and on and on. It's a very extensive, pull this out, you can really see a lot of detail. I'm still scrolling. I'm not going to scroll slower. You need to download this. This goes all the way to page 14, page 15. Finally, on page 15, we got to the end of the exam objectives, and then they give you a bunch of acronyms. Look at all the acronyms that are important to know for security. I told you that this is something you would need to know for security. Incredibly important to have that piece in there. Going all the way through another pages. We're all the way up to page 21 for that. And then they go through some things you may want to have if you want to set up a classroom to be able to do Security Plus. So that's why whenever I mention it's important that you have your exam objectives, that's exactly why I'm saying this, because it's incredibly important. You don't want to walk in the exam and not know what you're going to be asked. And unfortunately, it happens all too often. I would not be saying this if people didn't come to my site and say, I didn't pass my exam. And boy, they asked me a lot of things I wasn't expecting. Like, well, like what from the exam objectives did they go outside the scope of? And they said, what are you talking about, exam objectives? You need to have a copy of those. Very, very important to have a copy of the exam objectives. So make sure that you go out to CompTIA's website and do that as well. Incredibly important for that piece as well. Well, we've come to the end of an hour of this. Can you believe it? Going through all those pieces. We did pretty well with our questions this month, and we'll do this again next month. If you would like to learn more about my Security Plus course notes, you can always find those at professormesser.com/securitycn. Of course, I'm always adding things to YouTube and Twitter and Google Plus and Facebook and other places. If you go to professormesser.com/Facebook, Google Plus, Twitter, you'll find it. Just put something after the slash and you'll be able to find those pieces there. Don't forget your discounted vouchers are available, professormesser.com/vouchers, of course. And of course, our thanks to GTS Learning, that 1 hour live lab you can try out at professormesser.com/ it's not NetLabs, it's SecLabs. Watch us do this in real time. I think this is the third time I've done this, isn't it? There we go. See that? That's live television, people, right there. Except it's not television, but you know what I'm saying. So thanks so much for doing this. We're going to stick around after this on the after show and ask a few questions back and forth. Have you asked questions of me? And we'll see where this goes. This has been a good time. If you want to try this again next month, you can always check the calendar at professormesser.com/calendar and find out when the next one is. But until then, we'll see you. Thanks for joining us on our Security Plus study group. Thanks, everyone. Well, it is the after show. Gosh, my voice is still working. Who would have thought? I didn't. Oh, and everybody's talking about Java, how Java is the worst thing ever. No, Flash is the worst thing ever. We'll get that controversy going. Should we open the phone lines? I can try. I think I can try to do that. Let's see. Hang on, everyone, while I get some things off of my screen. Where did I put the, it's right here. Oh, I have to call in. I have to call in myself, or I'm not going to hear you calling in. I have to start the show. Start the show. There we go. Now, if you call in, you'll actually be put on hold. I won't be able to hear you because I'm not there yet. One moment, please. Where's my contacts? Let's call this right now.
Thank you for calling.
Yeah, you're welcome. Sure.
Call screener line. Please enter your show number and press pound.
I got to do a lot of things at one time. My show number. And press pound. That work?
Enter your 6 digits.
Okay. And a pin. Almost said the pin out loud. Wouldn't that be great?
You are now in the host room.
Wouldn't that be fantastic? If I just, yeah, and here's my password. And here's the pin. And everything else. Okay. See if you're going to be able to put up with me coughing and hacking through all of this. Maybe you don't want to call. Maybe that's a bad idea just to begin with, to go through that piece and trying to get those done. Okay, let's we have callers already on here. Let's see what person wants to talk to me before my voice goes from the 301 area code. Are you there, caller?
Hi, this is Teresa from that.
Hi, are you there? I can almost hear you.
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, what's your
I
name?
have a question about Teresa.
Hi, Teresa. Thanks for calling. What can we do for you?
I have a question about CPM and its alternative versus HSM. I was wondering if you could clarify the difference.
You're going to have to talk a little bit clearly and slowly. You're a little muffled, so I'm trying to make it out. I need to compare the difference between two things, it sounds like.
Yeah, HSM and CPM, that's what I was very questioning.
I am so sorry. I am just not getting it. Maybe if you're in the chat room, you can type that in, but the audio is just a little bit too muffled for me. Oh, so there you go. HSM versus TPM. Is that what you asked?
Yes, that's it.
So it's either you or somebody's figured it out in the chat. Okay, good. So thank you. This may actually be my sinuses that's not hearing it well. So I apologize with that. So you got two things, and these sound very similar, but they're actually very, very different. And these are two terms that are used on the Security Plus. So while I'm talking, I'm going to pull up something so we can kind of follow along with these two pieces. TPM is the one you were asking specifically, for those of you listening and live, specifically talking about HSM and TPM. I think I talked a little bit about HSM last month, but TPM is the one that you will probably run into more often than anything else, I would think. And that's because it's a piece of technology that is integrated into our computers themselves. The Trusted Platform module, I think I've got a slide on it that I can bring up to actually show you what one looks like. Here's the TPM on my screen. There it is. Trusted Platform module. It's in your computer. It's effectively an extra set of chips. It's actually a standard, but it's a standard that includes some technology that allows you to do some cryptographic functions in your computer itself. For instance, if you had something like BitLocker, and BitLocker is Microsoft's full disk encryption that is built into the operating system. You can't even start the operating system unless you're able to decrypt the drive, because everything on the drive is encrypted, and it uses this Trusted Platform module to make this happen. It has a cryptographic processor inside of it. It's got memory inside of it, so the keys that are created are burned into this. So it's got a very unique set of keys. That's very important when you're doing encryption. And it has memory in there, so you can also store additional keys. You can store hardware configuration information in here. If somebody changes the hardware of your computer, they change out a drive or they change out something else, the TPM will know it. And that's another important security piece. You can have the TPM look for changes in the hardware and decide not to boot your machine if anybody's been messing around with your computer. This is also something that has a password protection on it. If you've ever used BitLocker, you can have a PIN or you can have a password that gains you access to your system, and is the Trusted Platform module that enables that functionality. It's one that really comes in handy. In fact, most computers these days are going to have a TPM there because we're doing so much with encryption of our systems these days to make that work. And HSM is something that you will rarely run into. It's something that you will have in the infrastructure of your network. It's something the security administrator, for instance, would be able to work with. The HSM, it's usually a server or something that looks like a server. It might be a branded type of appliance that's in the network. And the HSM, it stands for Hardware Security Module, because this is where you store all of your keys. And we were talking earlier in the study group about having your keys stored somewhere else. This is a secure way to store your keys somewhere else. And you may be thinking, why would you take your private keys and put them onto these devices? Well, that's because these devices are much more secure than keeping them on a hard drive somewhere, because there is an authentication mechanism that you use to gain access to the private keys. It's like a vault. It's like a cyber vault for your private keys. This can also be useful if you're integrating some third-party products that need these keys. For instance, they're used very often to do mobile device management these days because everybody has a mobile device. It's got your corporate information on it, and your security team needs to manage that device and keep the corporate information private and keep your information separated from everything else. And they will very often use these hardware security modules to be able to integrate that encryption and security to the mobile devices. That's where I'm seeing a lot of them being built in. But you'll also see them in large web devices, web clusters, large environments where you have a lot of different machines and you need to store all the keys in one central place so that everybody can access them if they need to have it there. So you would rarely find an HSM in a small environment because your keys can be managed a little bit easier. But in larger environments, this is definitely the way to go. And as you can imagine, you will have many more trusted platform modules than you would have HSMs. Usually you would have one or a pair of HSM for redundancy, and you would have a TPM in all of your other separate devices as well. Hopefully that's given you at least a little bit of an overview, and certainly that's all you would absolutely need to know for your Security Plus exams. That help a little bit, Teresa?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for calling. This is one where this is kind of a hard one. I think of this one as kind of like the RAID question because you don't often get to work with RAID unless you're in an environment where you're doing that. And unless you've worked with an environment that had an HSM, it's just this vague idea of what this thing could possibly be in our network, because otherwise you're never quite sure what it is. You're never quite sure how this HSM and works in there, and then TPM, and they sound similar, and they're certainly got a similar cryptographic functionality, but how are they really used with those pieces? And that's where I often have those in there as well. This is one where, and in the chat room, everybody going, oh yeah, if you've got a TPM in there, this is going to be really, really useful to have that there, especially if you're doing something like BitLocker. Becomes very, very useful to have that there. There's a lot of other things you can do with TPMs as well. In fact, some of these may require you to have a TPM. In fact, I think with BitLocker in Windows 7, if you don't have a TPM, you have to keep your key for the encryption on a USB drive. It has to be separate. Then you have to plug in the USB drive every time you want to boot, and there has to be a PIN or a password associated with it. So having a TPM can be a little bit of a pain. And in some cases, you can't use some of these features at all unless you have a TPM. I know with Windows 8, for instance, there are a number of requirements for the CPU and some of the security built into the CPU. So sometimes these operating systems require some very specific kind of hardware to be able to run and to also have certain features enabled in the operating system itself. So thanks for that question, Teresa. That was a very good one. Let's go to some of the questions you have sent me as we are going through this month's of those pieces. Let me pull up my list of that as well. There's a number of questions. I get a ton of questions about encryption. I think that's one of the hardest parts of the exam for most people. And I think it's probably because, again, it's one of those you don't use a lot. Well, you use it a lot, you just don't know it. It's one where you don't implement it a lot. Until you start implementing your own certificates on a web server, you're building them yourself, you really don't understand what's going on. I just had to build my own encryption certificates for my website. I was changing some of the encryption that I was using because I have a reverse proxy. I have multiple web servers, and I want to assure that everybody's getting the right kind of encryption all the way down to my servers, and keep everything encrypted so that if anybody got onto the network, they wouldn't see anything. So I was changing over some of my certificates. I was creating my own certificate authority. I was self-signing my own certificates. It was kind of a thing, but I just simply stepped through and did it step by step, and I knew exactly what needed to be done in the process that it takes. But the first time you do it, it's like you're in a fog. You don't even understand what you're doing. It just says on the screen, I should type this. Yeah, it worked. Okay. And quite honestly, I'll tell you a little secret. After being in the security industry for many, 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 many years and traveling around and seeing many companies' certificate authorities and their PKI implementation, they sometimes don't know what they're doing either because it's so complex. You have to really sit down. There may be one person in the organization who really understands how it was set up, what it's configured as, and how it all works. And everybody else is kind of just figuring out a piece of it because you really have to understand everything before you're understanding the little pieces. It becomes a little bit of a challenge. Anything in the chat room, a good example, use PGP, use Enigmail. That's a very good front end to different email systems, and try asymmetric encryption. Send me a note with that you have PGP encrypted. Send it to james@professormesser.com. It'll get to me, and let's see if I can decrypt it. Then I'll encrypt one back to you. See if you can decrypt that one. We'll just keep going back and forth. My key is out there on the public PGP servers, so you can absolutely do that. And we can try that out. That should be interesting. That would be a lot of fun to do that piece as well. Let's go to, I had that list that I was going to go through, wasn't it? For my security. Let's pull those up and have a look. And of course, you can always give a call since my voice is, it's currently working. You can call the studio line at 855-785-RJ45. That's another way to get in and ask a question directly. And I'll keep checking in on that list of callers that's coming in as well. And if maybe you're not running PGP, maybe you're running GPG, which is really an open source version of PGP. You can do that as well. I think on my computer, I am running GPG on mine. Let's see if I am. I sure do. And I have my GPG keychain that I have up. I'm not going to show you my keychain because I have other people's emails in there that I've gone back and forth. But my key, see, I can bring up my key and show it to you at least. Can I do that without showing you everyone else's? Sure I can. I can try. There we go. And there it is. So here's my key. James@professormesser.com, and there's the key ID and the fingerprint. And this is normally what we would do if somebody wanted to find my key and they were going to send me information and wanted to confirm it was my key. They would contact me in some way, maybe give me a call, say, hey, is your key fingerprint 222940B57B0? We go through the whole thing. I'm like, yep, that's my key. And then you'd be able to do that. There's my key IDs. There's my sub keys, and I don't have any photo associated with this. Oh, looks like I have a new update for that particular keychain that I'm using. That's a good example of using GPG and being able to, you can find my key because my key is out there on the public GPG servers under james@professormesser.com. Yeah, send me some info. That'll be fine. I'm going to run this install while we are doing that. Let's go through also. Did I export this and bring up? I did bring up a list of all the questions. So talk amongst yourselves for a moment, and I will bring up some of those Security Plus questions. This is something that when you register for this, the registration's free, and I send you the emails so that you can be updated when the Security Plus study group is going live. And in there, I ask you to put a question. If you could ask one question, what would it be? And so I do that. I go through that list and go through those pieces. Let's have a look at your questions. Okay, I'm going to grab the latest questions first so we can have that. Some of you put some very cheeky things in here, by the way, and I read them and I laugh and then I delete them. I don't delete you from the list, but I delete the question because I don't need to laugh in the middle of the study group. What aspects of subnetting do you need to know? Well, for the Security Plus exam, you probably don't need to know a lot. There isn't anything specifically written about subnetting in the Security Plus objectives, but since this is something where you're probably working with a knowledge of Network Plus, in fact, they highly recommend you know your A plus and your network plus before you take your security plus, I would think there'd be an expectation that you would need to know some level of subnetting there. Pretty important for those pieces as well. A very common question I get is, how can I become a security expert? And it is one that does not have a single best answer. A lot of people do it in different ways, but I think the one thing that is the common piece, and as I mentioned, I've been around the world to different companies and talking to their security people. And one of the things that's common amongst all of the different security groups is that the people doing this enterprise security are almost always, 99.9%, they come from a very strong networking background. And that's because security and being able to secure the network has such a strong networking component associated with it. Just look at the problems with the Jeeps this past week and the problems they had with hackers controlling the car. Well, that was all through a network. Whenever somebody's attacking denial of service, you need to stop things going through the network with an intrusion prevention. You need to configure a firewall to provide an IPsec tunnel to perform network address translation to be able to allow or disallow information based on a TCP or UDP port number. That's all network stuff. Every single one of those things I just mentioned is all about networking. And you sort of pile things on top of that. If you have an HSM, then you're going to need to implement that in the network. Where's that going to go? How do you implement that in the right way? And you're going to need to have some networking knowledge to be able to perform and implement these products, these technologies, and be able to perform those tasks. So before I could say you need to become a security expert, I think you first need to be able to become a networking expert. And I think at that point, things should start to divert into the security world. Usually that's where we start getting into understanding intrusion prevention systems or port scanning or vulnerability testing. That gets you into the pieces of those. And I think that's where becoming a security expert really builds on that networking piece. So if I had to say anything, if you really want to become a security expert, learn as much as you can about the network. Now, there's other aspects of security. That's a very broad term, security expert, that gets into things like application security. So maybe you want to become a developer, understanding languages, understanding how to secure the programming of those languages. That is a completely different realm in itself that may not necessarily require a lot of networking knowledge. But when I talk about enterprise security, that's usually the folks who are doing firewalls, intrusion prevention, routers, and those types of security devices along with those pieces. I don't think you necessarily need to have a CCIE. I think that CCNP probably is a good place. Once you're that level where you're subnetting in your head, you understand network address translation very well. You can build out access lists very easily. You can look through the router or switch configuration, understand exactly what it's telling you. You're in pretty good shape at that point. Then you get into other things like IPsec tunnels. How does IPsec work? How do you set it up? What is phase one? What is phase two? How do I implement that with a shared passphrase? How do I implement it with the certificate? How do I build that certificate? So that's just IPsec. We haven't even gotten into other security technologies yet. We just tried to figure out that little piece. That's where it really works. If I had to pick one as a prerequisite to being a security expert, would I be a system admin or a network admin? I'd be both. I know you said if I had to pick one, but I just changed the question. I'd pick both. I think you need to know networking. I would probably lean networking most, but I think having a strong background in operating systems really helps. And not just Windows operating systems, but also Linux-based operating systems, because a lot of the tools that you will use in the security world are Linux-based, or certainly run better when they are on a Linux or Unix-ish operating system, a POSIX-based operating system. I think Linux is what you need to know to get into and understand security. The SIM that you're going to be using in security is going to be based on Linux. If you're going to be running an Nmap scan, if you're going to be doing vulnerability scanning, if you're going to be setting up a device on your network to do security, it probably has a Linux background associated with that as well. Very useful to have that there. And I think that that knowing the operating system and how it works allows you to secure it better. So if somebody shows up and says, we need to push out an update to an operating system, and it has this global requirement for all of our devices, and I need to use group policy to do it. Well, if you don't know what group policy is, you're already having problems. Now I got to figure out how group policy works. But if you've already got a knowledge in the operating system, you've already got that piece of it there. Question, is there a network intrusion detection, intrusion prevention device available to protect home networks during the growth of the Internet of Things? This is a really emerging market. And I think we've got to get more of a larger group of people kind of bought into the Internet of Things. So for those of you not familiar with the Internet of Things, it's effectively we're plugging everything into the Internet. So in my home, my garage doors are connected to the Internet. My cooling and the heating systems are connected to the Internet. My watering system for my lawn is connected to the Internet. And obviously, my computers in my home are connected to the Internet. You know, everything where I think I need, and my video security system. So I have cameras around my home, and my video security system connected to the Internet. So all of these things become incredibly important to secure, and not all of them are as secure as the other one is. I've told this story before. When they first set up my video system, they set it up without my knowledge. I had just moved into the home and I had not changed any of my routers. None of my devices have been updated. They sort of put everything in before I arrived, and they said, hey, we went ahead and changed your home routers, actually my business router for the studio. We changed that to open a port to allow access to the video server. There you go. And I freaked out because they didn't secure the video server. So if anybody was doing a port scan, they would have found that port open. They would connect it to the video server, which had no password on it, or I think it might have had 1234 as the password. And you would have been able to see my entire video system, everything that was here. And I freaked out. And the guy said, why? And I'm saying, hold on a second. I need to stop. I need to block that port forward that you created. He said, well, what's the big deal? I said, it's completely insecure. So the question about securing the Internet of Things becomes pretty important. We have at least routers that we can have in our home today, but we need something that's a little smarter to be able to understand how to allow access to these. Because the way that's working now, by the way, I don't create a port forward for my watering system. I don't create a port forward for my heating and air conditioning system. I don't create a port forward for being able to raise and lower and they see the status of my garage doors. And yet I'm able to access them from the Internet. How does that work? That doesn't make sense. I have firewalls. How am I able to go to a mobile device that is on, I could be in New York City and see immediately the access of any of my garage doors? Are they up? Are they down? When did they last move? What's going on? Because what they're doing is constantly talking out to the Internet and effectively setting up the flow that way. So they're creating and keeping open a conversation back and forth to their master servers. So that's how whenever I check in on the master server out on the Internet, there's already a connection back to home. So they don't need to create a port forward to be able to make that happen. Now, I could control that if I wanted to, but now is that safe is the real question. And that's where we have to kind of think about, can people get into those transactions? Is it encrypted communication? Can there be a man in the middle? Those are the things that become important as well. Are these devices encrypting? If they are encrypting, are they paying any attention to the certificate authority? And if it's an incorrect certificate authority, is it firing an error? Some devices don't. And they'll simply allow a man in the middle. And that man in the middle could open my garage door and off to the races. Now I've given myself something I have to test myself with. So there's a good example of me being able to to really look at the security, but I don't have time to go through every single one of these technologies and do a security audit. Maybe somebody else has, but this is going to be a completely new set of security concerns we have. And it sort of reminds you, a good reminder is the problems with the automobiles this past week, where people have hacked into cars and stopped them on the road, which of course was incredibly dangerous. And whoever these folks were that did that, if that article that was written was accurate, was incredibly irresponsible. There's better ways for security researchers to be able to identify these problems and make all of us aware of them. So that's how it works. And the question in the chat room, do I control my house? I absolutely control my house from elsewhere. So I could be in New York City like I was a couple weeks ago, last week, and I can raise my garage door. I can lower it. I can change the watering in my home. I can see the status of it. I can turn on a zone of water. I can raise and lower the temperature inside of my house. So absolutely, that is part of the deal. That's part of the Internet of Things, and that's what we want. But we'd also want it to be secure. Very important. Okay, my voice is now going fast because nobody's calling. So I'm going through questions. I'm not asking for calls. But I will go through the questions that you sent me because some of these are really good. The Internet of Things, I could probably go on for another hour about that piece. How in-depth are the exam questions? For example, would you be given a situation and would you choose the appropriate action taken? That's a very good example of the exam questions. I try to write my questions here so that they make you think. They're 2 steps. They at least get you into the mode of what you might see on a CompTIA exam. And although we can't talk about what exactly the simulations are going to be like, and we can't give specifics, there is a video from CompTIA that does talk about performance-based questions. I got to find it. CompTIA has a section on their website, which is how to prepare for performance-based questions. And of course, they didn't put the link to the video there. So now I need to go to my Instapaper, which is where I store everything, it seems, because I did put the link there. At least I think I did. I may not have. Taking a CompTIA exam. Is this it? Probably is. Let's link to it, shall we? And I can show you how to take a CompTIA exam. This is it. So let's have a look. They have a video called Taking a CompTIA Exam that goes through the exact screens you will see during the exam. Just go to the YouTube and type in Taking a CompTIA Exam. That's what it's called. So it takes you through some example of multiple choice questions. It'll even pop up at a calculator there if they have one there. And then they go through what some performance-based questions might be. So here's multiple choice. We got that. Fill in the blank questions. They may ask you fill in the blank. You've got drag and drop. They might ask you that one. Here's one that's a diagram. They may pop you into, they've got one with a command prompt. And they tell you perform a function at the command prompt, and you have to do that. So that's a very good example, I think, of what you can expect when you walk into the CompTIA exam. I think that's a pretty good one for doing that piece. So take advantage of that video. That's a very good video. It's probably the best one they've created so far that gives you the feel of exactly what that's about. So at least you'd be able to get an understanding of exactly what I can expect when I walk in the door. That's your biggest challenge, is getting through that fear of the unknown before you walk into the exam. And I think that's a good way to do it, by watching that particular video. In the chat room, so you have a home automation system. Great. You worry that it's not safe. How do I make sure it's safe? That's really the question. You can, of course, go to, this may be an opportunity for one of you, make a website that describes the security that is used by these home automation systems. Ask the companies, how is this secure? The problem is you're probably going to get a first line person that goes, oh, we just use encryption. So, it's secure, but you really do need someone who is testing this, who's not only seeing that it's encrypted, but they're able to try a man in the middle. Does it flag that a certificate error occurred, and does it stop the communication? Doesn't always happen. So that's very useful to know that. And I think that's one where you do really have to sit down with this and really look at the traffic. So you have to be really knowledgeable in security communication across the network if you ever expect to be able to see that. So a lot of people ask questions about the performance-based questions. What are they going to be? What type are you going to have? Well, nobody knows until you take the exam. And by the time you take the exam, you've signed the candidate agreement that says you can't talk about what you've seen. So there are, I think the best thing you can do is to go through the exam objectives, understand everything that's listed there, and perform some of the labs, like the ones on the freestyle labs, or do some labs yourself. A lot of the books will also take you through some labs. If you have a machine that you could start up and go the command line, they'll take you through pieces of those as well. So do that as well. I think that's a good way to get ready for the performance-based questions. As long as you know the content that's on your exam objectives, you're going to do fine. That's the important part of it. Is there truly any secure way to have your data secure on the internet? It seems all security designs get hacked. Well, that's because all security designs get hacked, unfortunately. I was talking about this last night with the Mrs. Professor Messer. We were talking about the cars that were being hacked, but it's also went to all of these patches that we got over the last week or two. There were all these flash patches. There were patches to every Windows version going back to Server 2003 and Windows XP because there were vulnerabilities that were identified, that were found, and they'd been in there since those operating systems were created. And it's just always been there. So the challenge, of course, is the bad guys are looking for those vulnerabilities, and they're not telling anybody. So, pardon me. So when you start working with these operating systems, there are things that are in our operating systems we use today, all operating systems, that are vulnerabilities, but nobody's found them yet. Or hopefully nobody's found them yet. As soon as the bad guys find them, they're going to use them. So we have to just maintain the visibility of what's going on in our networks. We need to find different ways to identify when our operating systems have been taken advantage of, when somebody's taken advantage of these vulnerabilities and exploited them. If I can identify the exploit, it doesn't matter what the vulnerability is. I have identified an exploit to my OS. That's where antivirus is moving to. The technology is moving very slowly away from a signature-based system of identifying malware infections and virus infections and exploits in general. And it's moving to one where we're just looking at everything all at once. We know that the only place an exploit can happen is in these very finite set of areas, and we'll just watch those areas. And if something happens to take advantage of something, they try to use this particular vulnerability and exploit it, we'll stop it right there. If a buffer overflow happens, we'll identify a buffer overflow occurred. If somebody tries to take advantage of this from remotely, we'll identify when that particular thing happens rather than identifying a specific signature that would cause that thing to happen. So very, very useful. Well, I think we've come to the end of the study group, not because we've come to the top of the hour, but because my voice has come to the end of the study group. So I apologize, everyone. This is why the Network Plus study group that was scheduled for last Wednesday was postponed until Wednesday. So that will be the next study group that we have, will be the Network Plus study group, which is on Wednesday. So it's not a Saturday study group, oddly enough. So if you'd like to attend that one, we're doing a similar study group where we go through all the questions and all of the answers, and we do them all with Network Plus in mind. So if you're somebody who wants to get a better understanding of networking, or you're studying for your Network Plus exam, make sure you attend that. You can get details on the time and the place on professormesser.com/calendar. I want to thank everyone for attending. Thanks for doing the Q&A with me. Thanks for stepping through all of this. Thanks for putting up with my voice. And thanks for your ongoing support. Thanks for all your emails and all the messages you send. It's extremely motivating. We've got so much more things to happen throughout the year. I can't wait to show you what's coming. And of course, we'll have another one of these next month. Keep checking the calendar for the next Security Plus study group, and we'll see you then. Thanks, everyone.